Good afternoon, Dragonites, and welcome to the workshop. I'm going to go over a little bit about acrylic bending and cutting, and this video was requested, so I figured I'd make it while I was working on the desk here. So we'll get right to it. I'm going to be doing replacing one of the bends that you'll see here in a second, and so yeah, let's get started with some little acrylic bending and cutting. Alright, before we get into everything for bending and, cutting the acrylic tube, we're going to go over real quick. So this tube right here, this 90, well, it's a little bit more than a 90-degree bend, so that's why I didn't do a sharp bend here. This was also my very first tube that I did, and it's the smallest bend, the smallest run of tubing. And I didn't want to waste a lot of tube learning how to bend, since this was actually my first time bending tube, period. Acrylic, PETG, whatever. It's just my first time, so I wanted to get comfortable with it without wasting a lot, so I started with this one. And so today we're going to redo this one and give it a more crisp bend that you see like the other ones, this run from the pump to the radiator. Up there you have the dual runs back to the reservoirs here, the two optical reservoirs with the flow indicator. And then you have the run from the radiator up to the GPU. And you can just see the bends here are a lot nicer than this rounded poor attempt. The cloudiness that you see is actually, I think there was a little too much soap on the thing, and I got a little bit of bulging too. So there's several reasons why this is the one that we are going to do. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to replace this one, give it a nice crisp bend. Alright, so first thing before we get to measuring this, measuring how much tube to start with, let's go ahead and take the tube out of here. Now what I could do is, just measure that piece and, go from there. But I want to show you guys exactly how I did my measuring. What I did is I took just a cheapo, I think this was actually Dollar Tree, level here, but it's got measurements right here. And what I can do with this is I can actually sit it on the fitting, and I can see the markings on here, and then I just took another ruler here to just kind of get the gist. And I'm just going to do this quickly in inches. For me, I didn't have to be exact because I did all the trimming down of the tube as I got the fit and the run in place. And so basically what I did is I just set this on the fitting here, so I would get a nice straight measurement going up, and then I would just put this on the fitting here, and I would just kind of make sure I'm going straight out from the fitting, and we're looking about 4.5 inches going up, and then from the radiator we're looking at say almost 6 inches. So we're looking at almost 10 inches for it. Now you'll see I like to give myself extra, so I'm going to bump that up to 11 inches. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so when we're going to cut the tube, you only really need a couple things. Depending on what kind of tubing you're going to use, depends on how you're going to cut it. Now if you have if you're using PETG or soft tubing, they have some, clamp scissors where it's got a blade, and you just put it in there and it'll cut, a nice clean cut. If you're using glass or the acrylic, use kind of one of these cutters, and basically you take it in here like this, you clamp it down, and you just basically roll this blade right here around and around and around, and you just tighten it just little bits every time, go around it a couple times, tighten it just a little bit more, keep going around until it cuts all the way through. Now, because it's winter right now and the garage isn't super insulated, my workshop, this acrylic is actually pretty cold, almost like it's been in the refrigerator, because it has been snowing and freezing temperatures outside. So I couldn't just use this. The only way I could cut with this is if I went extremely slow and held the entire process over the heat gun, you know, and just kept it warming. Then I could cut through. Otherwise, what would happen is, let's see if we can get this to focus on it. If you see here, you see all those cracks. No matter how slow I went, and you know, how much I just took my time trying to get it to focus for you guys. But no matter how slow I went trying to cut at these points, it just would eventually just split because the acrylic being so cold. I also think this tool right here, this isn't actually sharp enough, that it should have been just a little bit sharper and it would have been okay. But like I said, heating up the tube, then I could go ahead and make a straight cut. So, like we just said, so I like to use the factory cut edge because that's one cut I don't have to clean up. I don't have to deburr or anything like that, which this is the deburr tool. You got the pointed side in here that actually goes right in, and just give it a couple twists and it removes the burrs from the inside, and then you flip it over to the inward cone and you just give it a couple back and forth. You'll feel when it's kind of cleaned up, and there, all those big chunks of melted acrylic and stuff are now gone. Obviously this is not a straight cut, and this is what we're going to fix. I'll show you how to do that. But because I couldn't just use the normal cutter, I actually brought out my Dremel, and I just put on a reinforced Dremel wheel. This is just the cheapo, I think it's, you know, it's like less than $30 at Harbor Freight. But I got this one, and it worked fine. It works great cutting acrylic and stuff like that. It'll even cut the metal. You just have to go a lot slower. But basically what I do is I measure it off, and then I cut it off with the Dremel, and I will slowly spin the tube and just let the wheel do all the work, just cutting and melting the acrylic tube. And that way it cuts really nicely. But as you can see, like, the end of this is jagged and it's like misleveled. So what I do is, after I cut that, to even this out, I just kind of like tilt the pipe on the top of the blade like this, and it will actually slowly, eventually, and it'll just smooth out and even until you have almost a near factory cut. And then at that point, you just grab the deburr tool, get the inside, get the outside, and you have a nice, you know, clean edge. Let's see if I can find one of my cut edges. Okay, here's a, but if you can see, it's a nice flat edge. It's even, and it's been deburred, and I like to deburr the edges so there's a little bit of a flange, so a little bit of an angle going inward. It'll just kind of help things when you slide it into the fitting, and you don't want to do too much, you know, or you're messing with the integrity of the tube. So we have our tube here, factory cut here, so I'm going to measure from the actual factory cut. And I'm going to go ahead and do 11 inches. And so we'll line up. And it only has to be estimated at this point because we're going to, you know, cut off little sections to actually make it fit perfect at the end of things. So we'll give a quick 11 inches there. Alright, and I just gave a quick mark. And you're like, well, how are you supposed to cut a straight line with that? Well, what I do is, because this doesn't work for cutting, what I can do is I can line up the blade with my mark here. I'm just going to tighten it down just a little bit, just until I feel it grab, and then I'm going to slowly go around. And what that's going to do, I'll do it a couple times so it's a little bit easier to see. Now normally when you use this, it basically makes a straight line all the way around, and you just, give it a turn, a slight turn, go around a couple times, crank it down, do it again. But as this tubing's cold, once you start getting about halfway through the tube, it cracks, and it's miserable. So what I did there is I just basically gave myself a straight guideline all the way across and all the way around. Let's see if, yep, you can kind of see it right there. So I now have a line to follow with my Dremel. And whenever you're using any kind of power tool, even if it's not a power tool, you want to make sure you wear the proper safety gear. I'm going to get my safety goggles on real quick. If you don't want any chance of inhaling acrylic dust, you want to wear a face mask too, but definitely get yourself a good pair of gloves. These got stretched out by my father-in-law, and I gotta get some new ones. But you want it nice and tight against your fingers so you have really good control. But we'll go ahead and we'll cut this off right now. Now, if you're using a Dremel, you can't really get in there for a straight cut. It's going to have an angle to it. So what I like to do is I like to cut from the like this is the piece I want. So I'm going to cut from this side of the line and then just slowly rotate it. And the angle will actually, if I cut a little bit below the line, the angle of the blade will actually, when I get further into it, will actually meet the line. So we're going to do that real quick. As you can see, I'm rotating it. Rotate the tube as you cut it. Let the wheel do the work. And just like that, we've now cut through. So the wheel works enough that it just kind of melts the acrylic and cuts through almost like butter. And you just rotate the tube and let the wheel do the cutting and just rotate it slowly, and you'll cut through without any breakage or anything like that. You break the melted pieces off, and let's see if I can show you, but that cut is definitely not straight. There's little bumps to it and stuff like that, and you don't want that because that actually affects with where the O-ring seals. So over here the O-ring would be higher, on this side the O-ring would be about here, but on the other side the O-ring sits close to the edge, and you're not going to get a good seal, and you have a possibility for leaks. So we need to straighten this out. What we're going to do, like I said before, is you're going to turn on the wheel, and you're just kind of grind the tips, and you just angle it and press down where there's the high spots, and you just let the blade do its work again and just kind of melt the ends down until you have a nice even thing. So I'm going to do that real quick. Alright, there we go. We got a nice flat edge. It's all, straight across. There's no real dips or valleys in the cut. It looks like the angle is pretty much perpendicular to the run of the tube, which is exactly what we want. So we can go ahead and deburr it real quick. The inside real quick, and then now doing the outside of the tube. And I do it a little bit more on the outside of the tube just because I do want that little bit of angle on the end of the tube. Alright, and I'll go ahead and do that to the factory edge. Make sure to keep your deburring tool clean so it doesn't catch and possibly crack your acrylic tubing. And I'm going to get that angle on the end again, just like that. And it's just a tiny bit, like maybe 1/2 millimeter is where the angle needs to be. Just enough to give it a little, you know, pointed edge so it gets in the O-ring a little bit easier. Alright, so now we have our tube and we have it to the measurement we need. I could have waited to clean this up until we actually had it bent and perfect. But now we'll go ahead and move on to the bending part. Alright, so for bending the tube, we're going to need a few things. One, you're going to need a heat gun here, and I have it just clamped into the vise. The vise isn't actually on the, you know, screwed onto the table, but it's super heavy and it just holds it in place. Because this end gets super hot and you don't want it falling over. It'll melt something and catch something on fire, and it'll all be just kind of a bad day. And so what we're going to do is, it's going to get loud and I'm not going to be able to talk while doing this, but I'm going to go ahead and slip the silicone insert inside the tube. Without it, I'll grab that other piece right here. So if you look, I'm going to try to get close enough. There's a slight bulge right here next to my thumb, and that was because the silicone insert came to here and so it didn't do the full length of the bend. And so when it got hot and I bent it, when it was cooling, it was just kind of like sagged, the entire, you know, sagged down just a tiny bit, and you got a bulge here and a little indent there. So you want to make sure the silicone insert covers the entire spot you're trying to bend, because it holds the shape. So I'm going to insert the silicone insert here, and then I'm going to basically come over to my heat gun and I'm going to hold it just a, 3, maybe 4 inches above. And this is a cheapo heat gun from Harbor Freight again. I don't even think I paid 20 bucks for it. It's got a low and a high setting. I just put it on the high setting and I just hold it a good distance above, and I just sit here and rotate it. And I'm just gonna, sit and rotate it, and I'm just gonna move it back a little bit, because you want to heat. So if your bend's here, you want to heat a little bit this way and a little bit that way. That way the entire, thing is heated. If you want to see some of the effects, if you watch like Jay-Z 2 Cent or Salazar from Science Studio, they'll actually demo what happens when you get it too hot or get it too cold and you try to bend it, and what happens. So I'm just going to sit here and rotate it back and forth to heat the entire section where I want that bend, until basically it'll start to get soft. And when it starts to get soft, what I like to do is, if I really want a specific spot for where that bend is and I've marked it, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to go ahead and give it just a tiny bend, just a hair. And what that's going to do is it's going to start the bend. So as I keep heating it, it'll start to sag at that point of the bend. And then once it starts sagging, it's just, you can just feel how loose it is in the middle and how melted. Then you can take it over to the spot and actually bend it to whatever you need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the camera to where the desk is, so you can actually see how I do the bend and actually measure where I need the bend. And then I'll go ahead and heat it up, and then you'll see exactly when I put it, in the desk in one side of the port, and I bend the heated, we'll do that. But what I'm going to do is just do this until it starts to get soft, and then slowly put a small bend in it, and then keep heating it until it gets nice and warm and nice and flexible on all the sides. And then I'm going to take to the desk, put it in one side, and go ahead and make my bend to the angle that I need it. Alright, so after I heat the tube, I'm going to bring it over here, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to stick it in here, and stick it in one side. I'll probably actually do it this way for my first bend. And then I'm going to bend it until I'm at the right spot. Now, what I said was I was going to bend a little bit here, and then do another bend right next to it. So I'm going to bend the first bend probably right about here, and then angle it up this way, and then I'll do one bend right at the end. How you measure where your bend's going to be is, so go ahead and take your section of pipe that you cut and just kind of, place it inside the tube, the fitting a little bit, and then what you're going to do is you're going to figure out where you need. So if this was going to be a 90, I would, go up to the point on the tube where I was even with the other fitting, and then I would just make a little mark for, so you know exactly where you need to start the bend. You just make a little mark and then it'll run over. Now this one's gonna involve two bends, so I'm gonna start the other one down here to give me room, and then it'll run up at kind of a 45-degree angle here, and then I'll bend it down to the fitting. And I'll leave the camera here so you can actually see me put it in here once I heat it up and bend it. And I'll show you the heating process too of how I do it. Alright, so I got the silicone insert inside the tube, and I'm gonna pull it back a little bit so I can mark. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the fitting here, and then I've just eyeballed all of these. They got special tools to actually get everything precise. When you're working in tight quarters, precise is needed, but this big open desk area, I'm actually pretty good. So I want to start that 45, probably right about here. So I'm just going to make a quick mark. You can see that mark right there. I'm going to use that as my pinch point to start my bend. And I'm going to leave this recording. I'm going to turn on the heat gun. I'm going to heat this up, as you'll see, and then I'll go ahead and bring it down here and make the bend to exactly where I need it to be. Alright, I got it heated up, and I'm just going to come down here. I'm just going to slowly give it a little bit of a bend, like about there. A little bit more. I'm just going to hold it there while it cools down. Alright, that should be good. Now we got a nice bend there. Nice, not quite 45, but just enough. And I'm going to basically heat this up right here and then bend it down to that. So let's grab my Sharpie. And to get my bend where I need it to, let's see, the bend has to be slightly below the fitting. So we're looking at like right there. And again, just gave it a quick mark. You see right there. Now I'm going to heat it up and finish this bend off. So my tube is longer than I need it, so I gotta come out to the side here. And my insert's really too small, too big too, so what I'm gonna do is let's see if we can get it right about there. My silicone insert's a little bit in the way, so it's kind of pushing it. So I gotta gauge this. So I bought the silicone insert tube, well, sponsored by Mod by Mods. They gave me one of the silicone inserts, and I actually cut a small piece of it, just to do the small runs, and then the longer piece for doing the longer runs in the background. Alright, so question is, so if I line this up with the fitting, am I getting to that fitting properly. Looks like I should be okay. I might have bent just a little bit too low, but we'll see. So the next step would be to cut this where it needs to be. So we're just gonna pull and twist to get that, the insert will come right out. If you pull it out too soon before it cools down too much, you'll get bulging and misshapen bends. So you want to make sure it's at least cooled down to the point that it's going to hold its shape, and you'll just, you know, kind of figure that out. But here we go. Here's our two bends here. They'll go up from the radiator into the pump. For my silicone insert, I like to go ahead and soak it in a little bit of soapy water. So basically a small rectangular bucket, like those storage buckets, and I think I bought them for like $1 at Walmart. Bought one of those, put just I don't know, inch of water in there, and just a tiny little splash of dish soap, just enough to make bubbles. And what that does is it keeps the water from evaporating when you heat it, and you can get your tube out even if you've got a couple funky bends. And when you pull out the tube, the insert, you just gently pull and just kind of twist back and forth, and that'll friction, the soap will friction, you know, lessen the friction, and it should slide right out. Alright, now that we got our bends here, we have a lot of extra, right? Because that's when I measured. If you remember, I went straight up here and then back down to the fitting, where this shortens the run needed because it goes up, bends over toward the pump, and then in the pump. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in the fitting, or next to the fitting, so you can either push it all the way down into the fitting to where it needs to go and then measure, or what I like to do is I like to just line it up with the bottom of the threads so it's at the right height without me having to take the time to force it in. And then I'm just going to make a mark, just like I did with the before. I'm just going to make a mark that kind of lines up with the bottom of the threads of that fitting. And then I'm going to jump up, go ahead and cut that off, and then we'll test the fit. Alright, so we cut it down to length. Now we have a nice short section of tube. And now we can go ahead and fit it in here and check our fit. It looks like we're going to be pretty much dead on. It's a little hard to see because it's hard to see the fitting from that angle. But if you see, we line up with that fitting in that tube. We're a little bit high, but we haven't gotten all the way in with our fitting here. We still got a couple millimeters to go. So if we go ahead and put this in all the way, there we go, felt it click in. And we can go ahead and do the same right there with the tube. And there we go. Now we got a nice crisp bends, and let me grab that other piece wherever I just put it. Alright, and so here's the other one, and you can, you know, see the difference between the two. I wish I could slip it behind to, you know, show you the difference, but where this one just kind of loops up in like a lazy curve, this new one now has a nice crisp turn here, and we're good. And everything's good. That one lines up well. Alright, now we're at the stage of the desk. I need to mark out the GPU spot, and then I can start uninstalling and get ready to paint everything. So, wish me luck. Hey Dragonites, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like and subscribe button. Turn on the little bell for notifications, for hopefully we'll have a lot more videos coming out soon. Thanks for tuning in, and you guys have a blessed day.